Keith.
Hi there.
Kia ora koroa.
Mhm.
We're
Hey, today.
I noticed we're being recorded.
I've paused it.
Good.
Oh, no, I haven't.
Oh, it said record. The best bits are still to come. No pressure, Colin.
And I'm really curious, James, as to how you received the, oh, James.
Oh, James.
Well, bearing in mind, I had reminded both of them of the problems I had recording the one last week.
That was, yes, it
in
was
some
a sort
way
of
set
echo.
myself
Not
up there.
again.
Yes, that was a co-creative recording.
I am wondering, just mindful of the group and wanting to invite those of you who haven't said anything to feel welcome. Well, I don't know how you'll feel. Maybe you don't feel welcome, but anyway, this is a bit of a space to say if you want to say something, that be happy to hear that. We do have another little chunk. So
I'd like to say that I'm really, really interested in the conversation, the dialogue so far. I'm particularly interested in, how we deal with having to comply if we're meeting exam requirements and so on, and really interesting how relieved some of you are that you've gone beyond that. So I'm interested in that whole dynamic, because starting my CTA now, I'm quite happy to use it as a structure, but I'm already thinking how within that structure I can be myself and not just complying, not just being a good student. So it's lovely to hear this sort of conversation. I'm really happy to be part of this, and it's nice to connect with people. So although I haven't contributed vocally, I'm learning a lot, and thanks very much.
You're here. Yeah. And just picking up on that point, I mean, I like the CTA. One of the things I value about TA is how explicit it is compared with some other approaches. I don't know of any other approach that has its complete training and examinations handbook online available for everybody to look at, and I think that's great. And it's an example of clear contracting and so on. And so, in terms of the TA exam, it actually, the exam says, the handbook says, look, this is the structure, and then we want to know what you do. It's your, I sometimes say it's your CTA and you can cry if you want to. That's so it's often the mediators, it's often the priests, the trainers who sort of mediate that relationship, and sort of say, oh, you can't say this, or I wouldn't say that, or you can't choose a short-term client and so on. And I always go back to the handbook. Where does it say in the handbook that you can't choose a short-term client, that the tape has to have some sort of dramatic change on it and so on? It doesn't. And some years ago, I got so fed up with this, I actually wrote a piece for the IATA newsletter, which I think is still available. It's back in 2008, called Exam Exegesis. So I did an interpretation of the exam, which basically said, this is what the handbook says. This is what it says. This is what some other people say in this kind of hidden handbook that is in people's heads, which is, of course, parental. So it's like, just go back, classic example, the requirement in the psychotherapy exam to have a diagnosis, and then it says, and then you need to have a comparative diagnosis, e.g. The DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Now, a lot of trainers say you have to put a DSM diagnosis, your alternative diagnosis has to be DSM. And I had this argument back in the day with Ian, and I said, no, it doesn't. It says e.g. E.g. means, for example, doesn't mean i.e. you have to. So I used he said, well, what do you want to do? What are you going to do? I said, I'm going to use a neo-Reichian comparative diagnosis, because that was relevant to my client. And he said, oh, okay. And supported that. But, that's kind of reading. It's like, why are we, if you don't resist, if you perhaps don't have courage to take the word of the day, to sort of go back and say, well, actually, it doesn't say that. I can do, I can do my thing. I will do my thing within the structures. The structure of the exam is a lot less oppressive than some colleagues, sadly. And I'm not, there's a lot of good colleagues, and I'm not, having a go. But if a colleague says you have to do DSM, they're just plain wrong. They could say, I advise you because of the circumstances of UK examination and it's the most appropriate comparative whatever. But if you're a bit of a resistor and a bit of an anti-psychiatry sort of person, for instance, you'd say, no, well, I'm not going to use that because it's a, you know, DSM is actually an insurance scam. It's not a, you know, it's not a, anyway. But yeah, that's an example. So I absolutely, you know, want to support you, Jenny, doing your integration. That's what the exam's actually requiring.
Thank you, Keith.
I want to say that I really enjoyed your view of contracting, Keith, what you were talking about, because this has been an I have always struggled with this contract, and it has been the way how I have seen the meaning of the contract and contracting. But then there is in the exams, it is so important. It becomes a very how do you say an issue about sometimes this how is there a contract or what is the contract, and that it has to be so said so clearly, and I have felt it totally different how I am doing in my work. And I think that even though I don't push my clients to say what is the goal, I think that we are working in a contract. You know, there is a contract, and we are working very much co-creatively, or we are together there. Okay, I have difficulties to find the words, but I enjoyed those thoughts. Thank you. This helped me a lot.
Well, thank you, Ritva. It gives more power to my elbow, more, you know, the arguments. It's lovely to hear that, because it clearly has a resonance for people. And I actually do think there may be some more work to do in comparing different approaches within TA about contracting. You know, as you say, you know, there's a sort of more classical approach, but there's other approaches. And so, you know, I'll be thinking about you when I finish that chapter on contracts and contracts.
Yes,
I'm already thinking, oh, maybe I'll put some more in about that, because yeah, it's clearly quite fundamental, and I don't object to that. I mean, that it's fundamental to TA, but I do think we need to revisit and critique some stuff. Thanks for bringing your words in. They're lovely. Any others wanting to bring themselves back in?
I'd like to. My first orientation for many years was mental health nursing and teaching, etc., and humanistic psychology and psychotherapy, but got interested in TA. And I feel tonight, I mean, it's been so interesting, and really feel quite excited, because I think something that really touched me during my TA training were lots of things, but was actually the idea of the co-created. It just made so much sense to me. I never wrote my CTA, and I'm still considering it, but I now feel I've got the courage to write it my own way.
Hey.
And that's been a lot. It's been a long time, but it's only in last few months I thought, you know, I'm going to do this. But and so it's been very encouraging, some of the things that have been said tonight, to go ahead. And I don't mean to be difficult or obstructive, but I never felt free to be me in my training. So I'm really encouraged by this meeting tonight. So thanks to everybody.
I don't know, it was the last time, Keith, we had this workshop. If it was you or somebody else that said something about finding your own voice. And that really stuck into my mind. And for you and to everybody else, and to me as well, finding my own and your own voice.
Mm.
So important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never really felt my voice was absolutely welcome, because sometimes oppositional, but that's okay. I'm been around in the world for a long time and always worked with people. So I'm very encouraged by tonight. So thank you again.
Mm.
Oh, thank you, Aileen. And again, I'm really sorry that you've had that experience and that made that sense of it. And again, acknowledging the co-creative, the co-creative responsibility in that. I'm sure you played your part. But, when I hear this a lot, in the TA community, I hear that, I didn't really feel like I belonged, or I don't, feel that my voice isn't welcome. And I'm thinking, and it's not just my values or our values or Berit's or James or the fabulous six. It's TA. I mean, TA's got this big thing about autonomy.
Mm.
Yeah. What happened to that? With
Yeah.
students' autonomy, or so we're really out of value. If we're saying that's the core principle, it's the goal of TA, it's the Burns' idea about those and the three capacities and so on. I check my head sometimes, and that's partly why I moved away from TA, I have to say, because just found it.
And I mean, what happened to empowerment as well? That's one of the 5 ethical principles that we need to learn by heart for the exam.
Yes,
and
dignity.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it's really, really interesting, because I wonder, if we think right back to the beginning, to Byrne, how he felt he didn't belong, partly through his through Jewishness and name change, and then through not getting accepted by the psychoanalysts. And I wonder if that that feeling has come through TA. I've always had a personal opinion that TA is full of people who feel like they don't belong. I don't know about others. I don't know about other branches, but that's always been my feeling about TA. And I know that's, for me, one of the things that attracted me to TA was that I've always felt I don't belong. And maybe I thought, well, maybe here I could belong, because it's such a fun lot.
Sort of belonging with all these unbelonging people. It's wonderful.
Something like that.
Yeah. I remember running a supervision group where we had a similar vibe and saying, and I used this phrase, that this is a home for heretics. So it became, the supervision group became a home for heretics. Thank you. Leanne, how are you doing? And anything to say, any thoughts or reflections at this stage?
It's been really fascinating to hear the richness of the conversation. I think as someone relatively early on in their journey, I have instinctively found myself drawn to what I want to, that sense of belonging, and yes, I can run with this, but then also perhaps what I'm less resistant to or curious about how I could apply. So I think there's lots that I will take away, but I think the clear vein for me is there is something very special that happens in the co-creative space, and recognizing the energy and the experience we each bring and what that can turn something else into. Even when you were talking about, how's the dash between us, and I said, oh, that prompts me to think of that poem I put in the chat.
Yes, thank you.
And I hadn't thought about that for years, but it's amazing how you've touched on something, and through this shared language and space, we can create something else. So probably not very helpful to the rest of you, but for me, endlessly fascinating. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. That was meant to acknowledge that. That's lovely. I'm going to look that up. I did come across it years ago. But yeah. And how are you doing, Claire?
Sorry, I was on mute there. I've been wanting to jump in and say things, but I've just been so nervous. And obviously that's something I've got to work on. But I've written lots of little bits down. But first of all, I just want to say that I feel very humbled, and I'm very privileged to be part of this workshop at the moment, because I'm loving the openness. I can't even speak. I'm so nervous. My hands are shaking. Oh. I'm so nervous. In my head, lots of things are going around, and I've got so much to say, but it's just not going to come out in normal English. But yeah, I feel very humbled and privileged to be part of this, because there's a lot of honesty there's a lot of honesty going on, and I think that's really, really important as a beginning, and that's making me more engaged. Do you know what I mean? So I'm seeing people rather than a robotic therapist, if that makes sense. I am, like I said, very, very new. I'm only halfway through transaction analysis and psychotherapy. I've been 1960. I'm very, very new. I've already critiquing some of the things that I'm reading, but I haven't really had the courage to say anything yet in my course sessions. But I'm writing a lot of stuff down to probably build into my first assignment. But I love, was it Colin's question around the okayness? I wrote that down because I thought that was really, really important. And what James said about when we go into our sessions, that it's more of I'm okay, you're not okay. And actually, if you turn that round and you put you're okay and I'm okay, for me, that gives the client the autonomy straight away, and they will just feel more at home. Does that make sense? I don't speak with big language and big words. Sorry, I'm very much from the heart. Very emotional intelligence, I think, is what I can bring. And I just think that if you give that kind of autonomy straight away, you're going to bring that client with you. And also, what else I wrote down was being alongside the client, for me, is so important, because that is where you are going to get that relationship and get that learning. For them to learn is when they know that you are alongside them, and there isn't that kind of that non-equal, although you shouldn't come across like that. That's what a client may feel in that situation, if that makes sense. So yeah, this is really, really fascinating, and there's been lots of times where I've wanted to say something, but I've been like, so.
Well, I'm glad you're saying stuff now, and it's great. I would be really interested to read that first essay, particularly if you're going through TAP and critiquing it. That sounds wonderful. Yeah. Do I detect a northern accent there?
No, Welsh.
Welsh.
Yeah.
Cool. Oh.
And I've heard the name James Sweeney a lot by my facilitator, and now I can actually put a name to the face, which is very interesting. So yeah.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
I got Northwest, so yeah.
You can change it up if you like. I can do a Liverpool accent. I can do anything you want.
Well, actually, I wondered about the Liverpool because my parents are both from Liverpool, but I'm originally, well, I have Welsh. When I do my genealogy here, I say ko Ingarihi ko Werihi na iwi, which is I have English and Welsh heritage, traced back to North Wales, back to the 17th century. I've actually done more genealogical research since I've been here, because it's quite a big thing here. So we are Whanonga, we are family. So yeah, welcome. And I do get your nervousness, but also get your energy and your interest and your critique, and your, it's like, whoa, wow, that's great.
I think that's what I feel like I can bring when I go to. I mean, I've only been to 3 sessions. I'm so new. That's what I feel like I can bring, is more of the energy and the emotional intelligence. Absolutely. Really, I'm not that articulate like most of the people in my class, so I do kind of shut down because I don't use big words. It's not who I am, but I talk from the heart, and I just talk spiritually and from the heart, and what you see is what you get. And I just think, I'm really keen to go through this experience and look at TA as a foundation, but this co-creativeness is probably more my kind of thing, with the spiritual coming along with a client, rather than the strict kind of rigid, how I see it at the moment is more rigid TA. And I do see it quite rigid, really. But I think I might shush now, so I might start talking about reparenting, because that's as far as I've got. I'm not new. So. Well,
or re-adulting.
Yeah.
Like that's another, again, it's being a bit playful. Well, lovely to hear from you, and
thank you.
So I will say my bit. It's a bit late on in the proceedings. That's fine. I think I've been enjoying the riff, and really following on from what Berit you started us off with in terms of health. So in terms of values, Berit has obviously presented the value of health, which underpins CoCreative TA, and that's I think really important. And thank you for you know, honouring that and extending that, Berit, and I look forward to more conversation about. I think there's more to be written about that, for instance. And you, James, focused on and acknowledged that there is a method, and there's a methodology beneath the method, and there's ideas, philosophical ideas about people, the person as organism, and so on. So we can get quite fancy if should we wish. But I also want to acknowledge something you said there, Claire, about the simplicity, because one of the values that Byrne brought to TA was simplicity. You know, he liked plain language, he liked plain speaking, he liked visuals. He said, you know, in those early San Francisco seminars, you know, if you've got a piece of theory, bring a diagram, you know, like, you know, diagram it, you know, so you've got the visual learning side. So, and there was this sort of, you know, he was interested in translating what he saw as quite complex language into ordinary language. So, you know, repetition compulsion, which is quite a mouthful to get your head around, becomes games, you know, become psychological games that people play. So that, you know, you, Claire, are in the Burnian tradition of, you know, plain speaking, plain language. And although I've probably contributed to complicating some language, I think the spirit of co-creative TA is to sort of cut to the chase, you know, like the relationship model. It's basically, it's a 2x2 model, you know, past, you, I, past, present, boom, that's it. You know, 4 kinds of relationships. So there is that sort of spirit. But what I want to say about values is, well, first of all, I think that values do underpin a lot of what we do and how we think about the world. And so for a long time, since I've been writing in the person-centered approach, because I speak these 2 languages, TA and PCA, you know, interested in the idea that of the sort of philosophical congruence that a theory has to fit with us, not the other way around. So, you know, I have certain values that derive from my upbringing, particularly culture, experiences of life, emigration, immigration, also all those kind of things. And so I think we all have values, we all have views, we all have personal philosophy. And so I'm sort of doing that, like that's at the core. And then we train in an approach, or we are educated in an approach, which also has an underlying philosophy. And that's both my interest and my frustration, is that I think as a group, you know, transactional analysts have not, I think it's changing, but traditionally they haven't been very forthcoming about the underlying philosophy. And the reason I think that's important is because if the underlying philosophy of the approach that you adopt conflicts with your philosophy, then I think it's harder to do the training. So for instance, Thomas Hobbes had this idea of life, or man, ungoverned man, being nasty, brutish and short. Now, Thomas Hobbes, therefore, would have had difficulty in doing a Rogerian training, because a Rogerian training is not based on the value of life, that life is nasty, brutish and short. It's much more, you know, open, liberal and so on. So, you know, imagine this 17th century, whatever, philosopher turning up and working with Carl Rogers, you would have had a bit of a values clash. So in my view, that it's important to, you know, bring forth, be explicit about those underlying values. And so some of the underlying values of co-creative TA are health, you know, health psychology. Some of them are what you were talking about, James. And I think another one that I wanted to just mention, really, and I have been, I guess, embodying it, is criticality. It's critical theory. So co-creative TA is a rereading of TA based on, rather like you, Claire, you know, going through books and being a bit critical of things and saying, well, you know, why are 5 relationships rather than 2? Or, you know, how about reading this a slightly different way? So it's not a new school. It's a different reading of TA from a critical perspective. And so when you ask me about I'm okay, you're okay, I you know, you were kind enough, Colin, to say that I sort of come up with new things, but it's essentially based on critical thinking. It's like I have an independent mind, like I think most people, and unless it's sort of drilled out of us. And so I suppose I wanted to give a shout out, as we say here, for critical thinking, and that's part of life. And I was thinking about, and just in the break, actually thinking about Graham, and because he's obviously my partner in crime, and Nicole, you mentioned you've just been working with him, and I think one of the things I really like about Graham and our relationship is that we're quite robust with each other, and we disagree with each other, and that sort of comes into the book. And one of the best bits of feedback we had about the book, I think, was from a friend of his who said, you know, I felt invited, not to take sides, but I felt invited into thinking for myself. So, you know, the fact that people can disagree and say, oh, I don't agree with that, or, you know, whatever, or, you know, even disagree with a trainer, for instance, I think creates a space, at best, creates a space, rather than, I mean, maybe it's a bit like what you and Graham was talking about, Nicole. It can bring people together. Of course, if you disagree with people, it can polarize. But if you say, oh, no, you know, and we do this all the time, and quite unknowingly, like I've got a thing in terms of CoCreative TA about always talking about transactions, ego states, scripts and games in that order, particularly transactions and ego states. And I thought, very recently, I thought Graham agreed with that. Until recently, I think it was in one of the, maybe in the first of these things, I said, oh, we always talk about transactions before scripts, before ego states, and then scripts and games. I'm not so fussed about with the order of that. And Graham said, I don't think that's terribly important. I'm going, oh, I do, and I got really passionate. Oh, we always talk about transactions before ego states because, you know, discourse creates systems and blah, blah, blah. I can justify that. But what was interesting is my mate, you know, with whom I developed this approach, didn't think that that was particularly important, or that he did it, or that we did it. So, and I loved that sort of sense, that easy way I have with him, and I hope that you have it in your lives, because I also have it. You have it with my partner and my children and so on, to sort of say, yeah, no, not so much, or, you know, whatever, because I think that creates, if there is a basis of engagement and shared responsibility and love, and that, I think we can encompass that, and that's how actually new ideas, you know, get co-created, generated, discussed, pulled about, discarded, whatever. So I do wanted to offer that a brief pitch for seeing that part of the one of the underlying values of CoCreative TA is actually critical theory, or critical being and critical theory.
I think that's really interesting. Sorry, I got to speak. Sorry.
Not so shy now, are you?
No, you won't be able to stop me now. I'll just be like, oh. No, I just think that's really interesting, because there's just two words that popped into my head there. Was, again, autonomy. I must be obsessed with autonomy. I think that critical thinking, having that space to be able to bounce off each other, is giving each other that autonomy, that respect, but also, isn't it sharing best practice to be able to have those kind of conversations, to be able to come to not a better solution, but I see I've got nervous now, and everything's just gone, whoa, my brain's it's just gone. I know what I was trying to say, but yeah, I think it's good to be able to look at something and think, right, is that right? Should we do it like this? Because everything's always evolving. Everybody's, do you know what I mean? Everything's changing all the time. Bit like contracting, actually. When you start a contract with a client, you're constantly contracting, depends on where they're going. So yeah, I don't know if that makes any sense, but I felt like I had to say it. Sorry.
Great. Yeah, so you're linking criticality to autonomy and also to best practice and changing ideas.
I think that's important.
Yeah, thanks for that, Claire.
I was just wondering, Keith, and if I don't ask this question, afterwards I'll be kicking myself because I never took the opportunity in doing a rereading of TA. Have you addressed your mind to the term therapist? Or is there a need to relook at that term and its implications in terms of, I suppose, a rereading of TA around co-creative? Is there a need to look at new terminology, or is therapist still okay with your critical thinking mind?
Well, it sounds like you've got an idea about that, my friend. Would you like to?
Well, the word that came to me was, and it's probably wrong, but it's a starting point, facilitator of something, of a process. And the other thing that was kicking around in my head was this idea of the difference between going out with somebody for a pint and having a chat. The reason why someone presents to a therapist is there's a problem to be solved in some way. Someone has a problem, so they're bringing that problem somewhere to get help solving that problem. And I was thinking about what happens to that problem in co-creative approaches that's different from the classical, from the CBT schools and other schools, REBT and all that. The nature of the problem, and I had this vision in my head of the therapist, in quotation marks, and the client throwing the problem of a ball at each other. Here, you take the problem for a minute and think about it and throw it back to me, and I'll think about it. And in that way, then, the problem through a discussion is being solved, hopefully, so that the person leaves the process. Yes, I actually went and I solved that problem with the help of this co-creative practitioner. I don't know whether that makes any sense to you.
It does. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'm not wedded to particular words. I mean, I probably am wedded to some words, but not others. And I like of course, I support the critical thinking about, well, is the therapist the right word, and so on. And here we have great disputes about psychotherapists, because that's a term that's now owned by the state, because you have to be registered by the state in order to call yourself psychotherapist. So as I don't agree with that, I can't call myself psychotherapist, blah, blah, blah. So these things are all become very contentious. I personally like the word therapy because it comes from the Greek meaning healing. So I don't have a particular problem with the word therapy or psychotherapy, which essentially means soul healing.
Soul healing, yeah.
So, but insofar as, just if we deepen that a little bit in terms of what you're saying about somebody going to a healer, and I don't think of healing as like a sort of hands, like a laying of hands, like, oh, I've got so many problems, I just need healing and, some magic taken away. I'm not that kind of healer. So in that sense, I agree with you that I'm presenting myself as a therapist who helps the person with whatever they're bringing. The point about problems, I think, is, of course, I would tend to deconstruct the word problem, because, like nervousness or anxiety might be a problem, but it might not be a problem. It might be a safety mechanism, it might be a defense mechanism or a safety thing or whatever. I remember quite a lot of people, particularly my training role, would say, I want you to help me pass the exam. I want you to help me not feel anxious in the exam. And I usually come back to them and say, well, I can't do that, but I think I can help you feel anxious and survive. So it's that kind of, so it's not making anxiety a problem. It's like saying anxiety, in a way, it's like normalizing it, but saying, you obviously need to be able to survive your anxiety in order to present yourself and so on. But having said all that, I think if you prefer a different term, and people do, some people say, I want to be a counselor, or I want to be a psychotherapist, or a therapist, or healer, or a co-creative. I tend to think the longer the terms get, they're probably the more obscure. So if you say I'm a co-creative facilitator of blah blah blah. You know, it starts becoming quite long on your visiting card, you know, on your business card. So but I think that those are some of the ways to think, you know. Yeah, I think it's important to think about the words we use, and certainly about the approach we take. So it might be that if you take that kind of deconstructive approach, you probably need to say something like that in the first session. Say, I don't really, because, and actually I had a client, a very, you know, high flying CEO who definitely, and he came with a flip, you know, not a flip chart, you know, a pad, you know, to make notes on. He said, look, I've got this problem, I want you to give me the solution. And like I said,
yes,
I'm not that kind of therapist. It took him about 3 months to put his clipboard away, but that was the sort of beginning of a beautiful relationship.
Yes. Thank you. That's very useful. Thank you.
For me, one aspect of co-creative TA, or that was really important for me to find that in co-creative TA, is to move away from a mindset of looking at the people we work with as being in some kind of pathology, or having something being wrong with them. So I'm resonating very strongly, Colm, with the word problem as well. And rather to look at it like, oh, okay, so this is what you feel, do, think until now, and what is how can we together broaden your repertoire in thinking, feeling, and behaving, instead of getting rid of something, adding on to that, and broaden your potential. And I really like that in health psychotherapy, maybe, or health psychology, to look at the potential rather than the deficits.
Yeah, thanks. That's fantastic. Thank you.
It's a very homeopathic view. So that's interesting. It's a homeopathic rather than allopathic view, isn't it? Rather than cutting something out, surgery, rather. Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
Sorry, it's me again.
Amy.
You couldn't speak before,
Amy.
but now I can't shut up. No, it's Claire.
Okay, go Claire, and also Amy had her hand up as well. So.
Oh, Amy, you go first. Sorry.
No, it's fine, Claire.
I just wanted to say that what you said, Keith, about expanding on that, not seeing anxiousness as a problem, but just looking at it and saying, right, this is what's happening right now. And I think I'm doing some work with integral family systems. So with my therapist, so I kind of look at what I'm dealing with parts of me that happens at a certain age. And I work with them because some of them I'm going to have all my life because they've been protectors, and I cannot discount them or discard them. They will be with me, and they're with me for a certain reason. And when you said about the example of someone going for an exam, wasn't it? You can't get rid of that, but you can't. You've got to embrace it, isn't it, and see it as, right, it's an energy, it's been there, there's a reason why it's there, and we need to work with that and not ignore it. That's all I wanted to say, really. Sorry, I'm just rambling. I'm excited, but yeah, it's just working with something rather than discarding it. I think that's important.
And Claire, from that, this isn't what I was going to say right now. It's about, at some point, it served us well in the past.
Exactly. Yeah.
It might now be limiting us, but it served us well in the past. So that idea of, so yeah, you've been good for me, might need to change it. And where I was going before was Colm, your ball. As you were throwing the ball between the two, it turned into a red ball for me. And I thought, actually, when I think of co-creative for me, as you were talking about the problem going between, I thought, is that for me that round space that's in between both? And then as Nicole was speaking, in that sense of what Keith said about it expanding, and then that takes me to, I'm doing that, your ego state diagram, because there's the dynamism. That when it's static, we miss that, but the dynamism of this is going on between us. So it's not lobbing the ball, it's as playing with the ball in the bit in the middle.
Yeah.
If that made any sense at all. But Claire, I'm also a bit excited.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Amy.
It's a lovely image. We've got these two knitters in the room. I'm really struck by that and loving the fact that you're knitting. And of course, knitting is partly about shaping a ball of wool. We often have this image of, oh, it's like a tangled ball of wool, you know, into a beautiful, you know, a creative piece. Is that, to me, it's a lovely, it's almost a lovely image of the integrating handles.
Yeah, and it will become something that warms you.
And it was something warms and yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
So happy to see you knitting, Nicole.
Yeah.
I usually knit under the desk, but I got spotted this time. I thought, if you can do it, I can do it.
And I saw you and I thought, if you can do it, I can do it.
Yeah, there you go. And isn't that interesting? It's also an interesting metaphor, isn't it? That Suzanne, you've been talking about not being yourself and sort of feeling like you have to hide something. You know, now you've qualified, you can sort of be yourself, and it's like, here you are, you know, knitting, but it's almost like
knitting while listening to the great Keith Tudor.
And Harry, yeah, I remember going to a conference and seeing this Māori, lovely kuia, who's the kuia is the name for an elder woman, and with the moko, you know, you see sometimes with Māori women have the tā moko on their face, and which is a sign of eldership and well, lots of other things. Anyway, big woman, and she was at this conference, this psychotherapy conference, and she was carving a stick at oh, I forgot the name for the stick. Anyway, it's more than a stick, it's like a walking cane, and she was busy, she was carving, and I thought, what's she like? She wasn't particularly part, she was there in every session, and she was, might say the odd thing and so on, but she was essentially carving this beautiful tokoto stick. And it was interesting because I sort of had it was the first time I think I met her, and I thought, oh, that's a bit odd, and so I had, you know, like I was putting something on it, and at the end of the conference she presented this to the outgoing president with whom she had a relationship, who's fluent in Te Reo and so on. It was just beautiful, and I thought, oh, that's what she's doing. That's right. And I've since got to know her, and she's one of my cultural advisors. And so, yeah, it's like that's bringing the whole being, it's the whole person, you know. But I imagine in most Western psychotherapy or TA trainings, you know, people knitting or doing stuff whilst training or being educated would be generally frowned upon or seen or problematized or pathologized or something. But, so I think, you know, it's just about opening.
For me, this bit of the scarf, this bit that I've been knitting, will be the part that I knitted in this session. So this will be with me while I'm wearing the scarf, and I just love it. With every loop, I'm knitting in what we're talking about. And Claire will be there, and Dawn will be there, and Amy will be there, and Jenny will be there, and all of us will be in this scarf. And that's, I think,
wonderful, wonderful, how beautiful. And I'll remember that. That's lovely. Yeah. So we've got about 10 minutes. I just wanted to do a little, just you know, we've got 10 minutes to continue, but also be mindful that we're ending. Colin, you were about to say something.
No, I was just saying we'd have to start a knitting club. That's what I was thinking. The TA knitting club.
Yeah. I suppose I'm currently wondering whether you would say that the notion of harmony is one of the underpinnings of CCTA, or is that one of the, is it one of the underpinnings, or is that one of the outcomes of what your underpinnings are? Because I was sitting here and thinking, there's something that I don't feel I've been touched by in this session, and it is that sense of, that is what CCTA is for me. It isn't about that kind of individualistic autonomy. Yeah, so would you say that that was one of the underpinnings? Because I'm kind of, I suppose, surprised it's not been mentioned.
What do people think?
Sorry, I don't actually know what the word means. I'm going to be honest. I've been very honest. What was the word? Sorry, did you say, Amy?
Homonymy. My understanding of it is that together, I take it as to the we-ness rather than autonomy, one person for oneself.
Right, okay.
For us, it's my understanding. I'm sure Keith has
Well, I guess as the person responsible for introducing homonymy into TA, well, actually, although a guy called Robert Massey did first mention it, but he actually presented it in a slightly strange way. But yeah, I think is it a value? I suppose it's if I were to place it, it would be because it's a critique of autonomy. So autonomy is this idea that self-determination is the thing, and that we are autonomous beings, and that's the aim, that's the cure, you know. So it's both the sort of starting point and the ending point for Byrne. And I guess I would challenge that, yeah, and say, well, if you take more of a we collective perspective and a we are perspective, then you are talking at least to put homonymy, which means the drive to belong, the drive to collectivity, really, alongside autonomy. So I suppose I'm wanting to be both, wanting to say both, not that we replace autonomy with homonymy, but that we say there are two things going on. And that comes directly from a Hungarian psychologist called András Angyal, who influenced Rogers and others, who said there isn't just one actualizing tendency, or if there is, it has two trends. One is to autonomy or self-determination, because we clearly do sometimes want to be self-determining. And indeed nations want to be self-determining. And then there's other drives. The other drive is sometimes we just want to be merged. We want to be part of the big whole thing, however we describe that. And Angyal talks about, you know, being superordinate being. So sometimes we might say, well, I'm not an individual so much, I'm part of the bigger picture. And the reason I like that is because I think it speaks also to culture and or some cultures where which are much more belonging cultures. And so there are actually more we cultures than me cultures in the world. It just happens that our intellectual tradition that we probably shared, although they're different, are more me individualistic cultures. So to me, homonymy does balance autonomy. And yeah, I think you could see it as an underlying principle or a starting point of humans and maybe an ending point.
And also what I may be hearing is from what you've just shared, that the homonymy is actually coming from that underpinning value of the critical thinking. Yeah. So my critical thinking led to rediscovering homonymy. Yeah.
And I think it picks up on that concept of belonging, and it balances off the individualism against the fact that we can all be here together today and be sharing lots of stuff where we don't have to privilege one person over another, and we learn and get access to so much more by, you know, allowing ourselves to be a we-ness in this group together. And from that aspect, I see it as an underlying principle. But it is that both are needed, of course. Because I think there is something really great to be obtained. I think Maureen O'Hara, a person-centered writer, writes about social empathy, that capacity to empathize at a group level.
Yeah.
I'd like to add that I can't do I don't want to, and I can't do my TA journey on my own. I mean, I've always done things on my own, and this is a big learning for me, and I really love now learning alongside others.
Yeah, again, it's interesting how in our education system there's a real drive when we're younger. We have to do all our work by ourselves. And yet at the other end of our education system, most researchers I know work in groups, which is, you know, interesting. I think learning is a joint enterprise.
I wonder whether that's also generational, because I sit and hear how my children learn, and they're on their phones with their friends, and they're, you know, they're giving this and showing that, and I'm like, why are you that feeling? Why are you doing their work for them? That's not how we work. There's that concept of sharing and doing together, whereas, you know, I was in that very, yeah, you do it for you, and, you know, it's all very close. So
yeah,
I think there's maybe there's a change in that approach as well within education, maybe.
Yeah,
absolutely. I remember in 1979 when I did my social work training, and a friend of mine, and we were doing a master's thesis, I think it was called dissertational thesis, and we went to the university authorities and said, can we do a joint one? We want to write, and we're happy to do the, you know, 15,000 words, we'll do 30,000 words, but we want it to be joint and, you know, get our 2 degrees. They wouldn't, they just thought that was ridiculous, and they wouldn't countenance it. 40 years later, whatever it is, apparently now you can do joint projects at that sort of degree level. It's still rare, but it's possible. There's a lovely Māori whakatoki, which is a proverb that speaks to this, which I like, which might be quite a nice way to sort of kind of end or nearly end. It's e hara taku toa I te toa takatahi, engari he toa takatini, which has got a nice sort of da-da-da-da to it. And the translation is, my success is not mine alone, it is the success of the collective. So we can't do things on our own. We are as human beings, we are group animals. We're social, political animals, according to Aristotle. And equally, when we do things, that means that our success is not just mine. It's also the collective. So the success of CoCreative TA is also a collective success. Doesn't only belong to me and Graham. So that's a lovely, for me, it's a lovely way to sort of end this very collectively minded event experience, time together. Did you have some closing words, James or Berit, or indeed anyone else?
I think I've just really enjoyed being here and listening to everyone. It's been great, and sharing with you. And really appreciate all that you've brought, and really appreciated you bringing yourselves into the room.
And I really like the ending of this session, talking about the we-ness and how we all are connected. For me, it's like we all are connected like one body. And what we are doing to all other people, we are doing to ourselves. So yeah. No man is an island. I don't remember who said that. That's an old quote, but it really is true.
I think it's John Donne, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, it is John Donne, yeah.
You see how much learning there is within the group.
It is. And I'd like to thank you all as well. It kind of feels like, you know, I got a bunch of new friends. It's nice to get to know you.
It's been a wonderful experience. I've really enjoyed the conversation very, very much. One of the best conversations I've had for a long time. So I'm very grateful to you all for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colin.
I've really enjoyed belonging to this group this evening.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you for these ideas, and hyvää yötä. It's good night in Finnish. Hyvää yötä.
Good to meet you, Ritva. I think you and I must be about the furthest away that you can get in the world. Because you drill through, you get from Finland to
This night here.
Yeah.
I would just like to say thank you and lots of appreciation for everybody and all the input that's been around tonight. It's been so rich and helpful and made me happy.
Good luck with the CTA.
Yeah.
Well, it's very much on my mind. I need to take it to the next step.
I really enjoyed this rather intimate group and group size. Really nice. Thank you all. And thank you, Keith, for, I don't know how early your morning is. It's not that. What's the time?
It was early, but it's 10 o'clock now. So yeah, it was half 7 to 10. It's probably my limit of getting up for half 7. It was definitely worth it. So thank you.
Thank you very much for holding the space. It felt really special. Really special. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate that as well, that I've just felt really welcomed. And yeah, it's been major learning for me. Yeah, and yeah, I'd love to do this again, actually. I've really enjoyed it, considering that I'm really, really new and I was really nervous at the beginning. I've definitely found my voice, and that only comes from you making, I feel like I've got the permission. You've made me feel welcome enough to speak. So yeah, that's really nice. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody else for listening to me rambling on.
Great.
Lovely hearing you, Claire.
Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. Really good evening. Glad I joined. Very grateful and lots to ponder.
Thanks everyone for an interesting evening. I really appreciated all the little nuggets that you've brought of that's helping me deepen my understanding of CCTA. Thank you.
Great. Well, we do need to close. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou kapo. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Keith.
Thank you.
Bye.
Nice to meet you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Berit and James